So in this video I want to talk about dyspraxia, and this will probably be my longest video on dyspraxia, and I feel that there's an intelligent discussion to be had and potentially a philosophical discussion to be had. So I guess the first question to ask here is, what will be discussed in this video? And there's going to be 6 points. The first point will be, what is dyspraxia? We'll discuss this quite quickly. The second point will be the diagnosis of dyspraxia. The third point will be dyspraxia in education. The fourth point will be dyspraxia in intelligence. The fifth point will be dyspraxia and flowcharts. And the final 6th point will be dyspraxia as a hidden advantage. So what's the purpose here? That's a good question. So obviously I want to always, when I make videos on dyspraxia, I want to create awareness. And I'm hoping that this dialogue can, offer some solutions and offer some questions. And I'm hoping as well it will encourage people to think. So when we're looking at what is dyspraxia, I want to separate it into two categories. I want to look at a sentence definition of dyspraxia and a paragraph definition of dyspraxia. So when we're talking about a sentence definition of dyspraxia, we can see dyspraxia as a common disorder that affects movement and coordination. And the reference here is I believe is the NHS Direct website. So what does this mean? So if we take Jack has dyspraxia, it can mean that he struggles to ride a bike. Or if we take Sarah, Sarah has dyspraxia and she struggles to drive a car. Or if we have Tim may struggle with writing. And again, this all falls under the umbrella of coordination. When we talk about a paragraph definition, obviously we have the coordination, but then we can have what it can affect. And, we've got more elements here, such as speech, social situations, emotions, personal and organizational skills, time management, etc. So we can define dyspraxia in the sentence with the coordination, with the fine and gross motor skills. But we can also have this bigger definition of dyspraxia, which incorporates more elements, for want of a better word. So let's talk about diagnosis of dyspraxia. And I want to tell my story with regard to this, because I was diagnosed when I did my first degree, and I was assessed by an educational psychologist. So I was assessed by the psychologist. They did their assessment, and in their report they gave me this diagnosis of dyspraxia. So this leads to some other questions. The first question being, can other professionals diagnose officially? And then the second question, what a diagnosis is not. Potentially I could have worded that better, but bear with me. So can other professionals diagnose officially? Yes, and we'll get into that. And what a diagnosis is not? Well, you couldn't be diagnosed by a friend if they are not of, if they're not qualified to give that diagnosis. So if Tim sees Sarah and sees behavior that he believes reflects dyspraxia, him pointing out you may have dyspraxia is not a diagnosis. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have dyspraxia, but that wouldn't be an official diagnosis. So when we talk about official diagnosis, it's important to recognize what professionals can give this diagnosis. So we have a few professionals that can diagnose. So the first one is the educational psychologist. The second one is a pediatrician. The third one is the pediatric physiotherapist. I hope I've pronounced that right. The fourth one is the pediatric occupational therapist. And the fifth one is the clinical psychologist. So, for example, Sally has dyspraxia and she's diagnosed by a clinical psychologist. This would mean that Sally has an official diagnosis of dyspraxia. Tom visits a pediatrician, they do the appropriate assessment and they diagnose him with dyspraxia. That means he has an official diagnosis. So let's talk about dyspraxia and education. And the first question is, what do we mean by dyspraxia and education? So I'm just going to briefly address the university context, but we could really talk about any context of education. So if you have a diagnosis, you may be eligible for support. So you may be eligible for having a tutor, you may be eligible for having equipment, or any type of reasonable adjustment. In my experience, the way you get this is you have an assessment, and in that assessment, I believe they determine the need, and then they identify the solution, and I believe this report is submitted, and then it needs to be authorized. So when I'm talking about dyspraxia in education, I really want to talk about learning styles, because I think learning styles is really important for if you have dyspraxia. Learning styles effectively is important for everyone, but I think it's important to this context as well. So I guess the first question is, what is a learning style? Well, if we look at learning styles, in a simple sense, it's the way we learn, but there's three particular type of learning styles that's important. The first one is visual, the second one is auditory, and the third one is kinesthetic. So a visual learning style may be illustrations, it may be PowerPoints, it may be videos. When we talk about the auditory learning style, this could be podcasts, this could be oral presentations or one-on-one conversations. And when we're looking at kinesthetic learning styles, this could be role play or hands-on activity. So I think it's important here that in the role of education and dyspraxia that you understand what your learning style is. And you can assemble, if you can assemble the information on what your learning style is, then this can help you, particularly in any type of academic pursuit. And it's actually an important evolutionary step, because if you don't understand your learning style, then this will inevitably hinder your learning. So let's briefly address dyspraxia and intelligence. And when we talk about dyspraxia and intelligence, it's important to acknowledge that intelligence is actually quite a complicated thing. And therefore, because it's a complicated thing, this becomes a complicated question. Let me break that down. When we talk about intelligence, there are different forms of intelligence. There's musical intelligence, naturalistic intelligence, existential intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, bodily kinesthetic intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, linguistic intelligence, etc. So we have all these different degrees of intelligence, and inevitably, if we take, Sally and Amy, they will have varying degrees of intelligence. So, Sally may be better linguistically, but Amy might have better intrapersonal and existential intelligence. So I think this is a difficult question, but the simple answer to this is that no, dyspraxia does not affect intelligence. But I think there's a different question to ask here. And I think that question is, can someone with dyspraxia have a high level of intelligence? And clearly the answer is yes. So we can create a fictional character like Leon. Leon has dyspraxia, but even though Leon has dyspraxia, he can still have a very high IQ. And indeed, to my understanding, there are people that have dyspraxia and do have high IQs. So even though this can be a complicated question, the easy answer is that dyspraxia does not affect intelligence, and with people with dyspraxia can be very intelligent. So let's talk about dyspraxia and flowcharts. And the first question surely is, what is a flowchart? So a flowchart is a diagram that represents a workflow or a process. So then the second question would be, why use a flowchart? And then the simple answer is that the reason to use a flowchart is because it improves communication. Communication is not only essential for people who have dyspraxia, communication is actually essential for human beings. Let's give a quick example. So if we're trying to break down the structure of an organization, we can use a flowchart to do this. So at the top we might have the CEO, and then under that we might have marketing, finance, and the HR. So under marketing we'll have the marketing manager, the assistant manager, and then the frontline workers. And then under finance we'll have the head manager, the assistant manager, and then the frontline workers. And then under HR we'll have the manager, the assistant manager, and then the frontline workers. So through a flowchart we can see this process very, very clearly. So the flowcharts, they improve communication, they simplify the process, and they reduce the comprehension issues. So to give greater clarity, Leon can use flowcharts to understand his job, or Sarah can use flowcharts to improve her computer skills. So flowcharts can be really essential for development and growth. So what do I mean when I say that dyspraxia can provide a hidden advantage? What is this philosophy, and is it tangible? Well, the logic is simple. The logic is that through adversity there's an opportunity for growth. And because dyspraxia can present some problems, there's more adversity, and therefore there's more opportunities. Let's give some context. Let's paint a picture somewhat. So Leon struggles to read, but finds strategies to overcome this. So the adversity, the struggling to read, provides an opportunity for Leon to grow and therefore become a better reader. So, there's another element to this as well, and that when we suffer defeat, this can offer an opportunity for reflection, and reflections offer opportunities for growth. So this is why I say the hidden impairment can be a hidden advantage. The more losses that we have, the more opportunities we can reflect, and the more opportunities we can grow, and therefore we can use these barriers or losses as a way to develop, evolve, and grow. So in conclusion, what have we learned? So number one, we have a simple definition of dyspraxia, a one-sentence definition and a paragraph definition. Number two, we have discussed the various professionals that can diagnose dyspraxia. Number three, with regards to education, we have understood what the three learning styles are and understand that it's important to apply it accordingly for our development. Number four, we understand that even though intelligence is a complicated thing and hard to measure, dyspraxia does not affect intelligence, and therefore people with dyspraxia can have a very high level of intelligence. Number five, we understand that flowcharts can be used as a key to enhance communication. And finally, number six, dyspraxia can become a hidden advantage because through the barriers can actually be opportunities to reflect, learn, grow, and develop. So with that being said, I sincerely hope you have enjoyed the content.